Hello, my name is Lisa Ross, though you may know me better as Paper Daisy Creations, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to graft your cowl together. We're going to do that using Kitchener stitch, which is a way of taking a tail of yarn and weaving it through the live stitches to create a stockinette fabric. Now the first thing you need to do is put your held stitches onto, you'll need to remove your provisional cast on and put them onto a set of needles. I recommend using a set of needles that is slightly smaller than your gauge needles. So I used a size 3 needle to knit the cowl. I went down to a size 1 in order to easily fit it through the stitches. Another recommendation is you might want to use a longer cord than the 16-inch circular that you used to knit the cowl. And the reason why is because it allows you to lay those stitches flat. And just work with one side at a time. So you can see with my live stitches on this 16-inch circular, they're all bunched up, and I just find it a little bit easier to work with them flat. So I'm going to work with a set on each just so you can see what that is like. Now, I do have a tutorial for picking up your provisional or taking out your provisional cast on as part of my provisional cast on tutorial. However, these stitches were knit in the round, so it's a little bit different, and they were knit with stranded color work. So when you're going into those stitches, while you do still go into the right leg of the stitch, there are going to be cases when you're picking up stitches where the right leg is in one color and the left leg is in a different color. And that's okay as long as you make sure that you're consistent with how you pick up the right leg all the way through. What I did after I put these stitches onto the needles and after I removed the cast on is I went through the chart and I just double checked to be sure that I had the right color in the right order, and I fixed it if it was incorrect. Because you're doing stranded knitting, and because the stitches are worked in the opposite direction, there is going to be that slight jog by the half, because of the half stitch difference. You just need to be sure that you have all the stitches ready to go. Okay, so I ended on the green. This is how I ended my cowl, and the orange was where I began. So let me show you how to position your stitches. Now, what I have done to get started is I have folded the cowl in half with the green. So the green was the final color that I used, and I've got my yarn attached to this side of the cowl. And I laid it right on top of where I began the cowl, which was with the orange. And so I had these lined up. And what I'm going to be doing is grafting the sides like this, so that this orange citrus slice will line up with the green square, just so that you get that same patterning as we have for the rest of the cowl. Now, it is possible at this point if you wanted to introduce a twist to your cowl, but that is not how I have it designed. If you wanted to do that, you would just do a full twist, and then you would have your Mobius cowl when you're finished. But we're just going to do it as is. And what I want to do is line up these two sides, and you can see how nice and flat this side with the longer needles is laying. Right next to the square. So I've got the orange, this was my start, and the square, that was my, the green square was my final round. I'm going to be using Kitchener stitch to weave the yarn in and out of the stitches, and what that's going to do is create a stockinette fabric that will finish off my cowl with just one single white round. Now, the yarn that I broke. So when I broke my yarn tail, I left a length for the Kitchener. And then I wound it up and I used a removable stitch marker to attach it to my cowl so that when I blocked it, that yarn did not get all tangled up. This yarn has been wet blocked with a twist in it, and so it's going to be a bit twisty as I work with it, but no big deal because I will do a final blocking on this row. Now, for weaving in these this yarn tail and grafting your stitches together, you need to use a tapestry needle. And you do have a long length of yarn, so there is going to be a little bit of pulling through and some yarn management. Now, I am not using this needle for my flat stitches, so I'm just going to pull it through a little bit more so I don't get confused. And then I'm going to line up my front row of stitches. Another thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to mark the very first stitch for each of these rounds. And that way, when I come back to these stitches, I'll be able to work them with the final ends, just as it was intended to be. And I'm just going to put that removable stitch marker on the outside of my work. All right, now the tail, as you can see, is not on the working needle. So that's on this back needle that I'm not using. And I'm starting on this new needle right by that green square that I've created. So a Kitchener stitch, you're going to take your needle and you're either going through knitwise, like if you were going to knit the stitch, or you go through it purlwise, as if you were going to purl the stitch. And then the other thing is that you're either going to pull it off the needle or you're going to leave it on the needle. So we're going to either knit off or purl off, and then we're going to knit on or purl on depending on where we are in the patterning. So I'm going to begin by taking this first stitch on the square side. I'll call this the square side since we've got a square right there. And I'm going to knit that stitch off. I'm not actually knitting it. I am going through knitwise with my tapestry needle and pulling that stitch off. And I pull that yarn all the way through. Again, we've got a nice length here, so it's going to be quite a bit of pulling. Okay, and then I need to go into this stitch purlwise, and I'm going to purl it on. So for this side, I always say knit off, purl on. And I'm going in purlwise, and I leave it on my needle. Now I'm ready to work the back needle. Now for the back needle, I'm doing the opposite. I'm going to purl off, and I purled off the stitch that has the removable marker on it. And then I'm going to knit on. And so I go in knitwise onto that stitch and I just leave it on my needle. Ooh, and don't get your marker caught. There we go. Okay. Those 4 steps, knit off, purl off, knit on. Those are the 4 steps of Kitchener stitch. All right, so we've done our first set and we're just going to keep going. So let me show you again. Now, anytime I say knit off, it means I'm taking my tapestry needle and going in knitwise to that next stitch. I knit it off the needle. So I pull the needle knitwise off. Don't get your markers caught. And then purl on. So you go in purlwise and leave that stitch on the needle. Now I'm going on to this back needle, which if you remember has my orange citrus slice. I'm going to purl off. So go in purlwise and pull off. And then I'm going to knit on. So go in knitwise. Oh, and this mine is going to look a little bit different because I actually have a doubled stitch there, and that is just because I wove in that end as I was going. So that is worked. This is just a single stitch. It's just important that whenever you weave in ends that way, that you always treat it as a single stitch. So I go in knitwise and leave that stitch on the needles. Okay, and I'm going to do that again. Knit off, purl on. Now, I'm doing that all in the same step. So let me show you that again, because rather than pulling the yarn through twice, I don't want to split that. I can just do it with my needle by taking this off, knit off, purl on, and then I can pull through. Makes it a little bit faster. If you've ever closed the toe of a sock before, there's a good chance you've used Kitchener stitch. All right, on the back needle, I'm doing purl off, knit on. Again, I just want to show you, I've got these double stitches. Those are used as a single stitch, and that's just because that's how I wove in my ends as I was going. So I'm going to purl off. I take it off the needle, and I'm going to do that next step right now, knit on. Purl off, knit on for the back needle. And all these extra needles are going to want to make it a little bit more challenging. Now, as you're pulling, you do not want to pull it super tight. And the reason why is because we're going to create just a nice stockinette row. And so it should be about the same tension as the rest of your stitches. At this point in the knit, it's too tough to show you. It's kind of wonky. We've got to get a little bit further along before you can see it better. And then the important thing to remember is err on the side of looseness, because you can always tighten it up at the end. But if you don't have enough slack in your yarn, you're not going to be able to go in the opposite direction and make it looser. All right, I'm back to the front needle. And you can see the yarn, I left it here. It's hanging off the back. So I'm ready to do the front needle. And I'm going to knit off, purl on, pull the yarn through. Purl off, knit on, pay no attention to those doubled stitches. Oh, make sure you don't get your needle caught in there. Knit off, purl on. And one little trick you can use to see what step you're going to do first. I have my yarn hanging off of this end, so I'm ready to begin this side. And you can see what I'm looking at right here are the purl stitches. And that's a good way to remember that this stitch will be purl off, knit on. And again, just ignore my doubled stitches. When I'm looking at this side of the fabric, the first step is going to be the knit, because that's the knit side of the fabric. And I'm going to knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. That was the last of my doubled stitches, which keeps my ends woven in securely. And you can see that the stitches are starting to come together. Again, it's going to look kind of messy at the beginning, but I promise you by the time we finish, it's going to look great. All right, knit off, purl on, and just keep saying that to yourself. Don't let anyone distract you. These are a lot of stitches to do. Purl off, knit on, Okay, so I'm about halfway through and I just wanted to show you what it looks like. Now, it's not going to look super clean yet. I'm using bumpy yarn on stitches that were already blocked. So it's definitely going to require blocking to finish off this seam. Also remember there is a slight jog because it's color work and we're using a solid white round, whereas none of the other stitch patterns used that. So it's definitely the seam of the cowl, so don't be alarmed about that. I wanted to show you what happens when I get to the end of this needle because as you remember, I was working this one on two different sides. The other one is curved around on these circular needles, the 16-inch circulars, although when I do have enough slack, I do find it easier to actually work those in the same magic loop way that I'm working the other stitches. All right, so I've got my, the last stitch I did was the knit on the back set of stitches. So I'm on my front needle, I'm going to knit off, purl on. And then on this back needle, I'm going to purl off, knit on. So that's not a problem for that stitch. Remember, don't pull it too tightly. I knit off, purl on. And now on this back needle, I only have one stitch left. So I'm going to purl that stitch off. I'm going to go ahead and work that all the way through. And then I can flip my cowl to work this back set of stitches and just pull that needle into place, remembering that I did my purl off already. Now I just need to do my knit on. And then this is also a really great place to check and make sure that your stitches are all lined up on the back side of your cowl and that you're ready to keep going and finish that off. Also, just double check to be sure that you have woven in all of the yarns that, that need it within the inside of your cowl. All right, I am down to the last two stitches. So this is what the second side looks like. Again, you are going to need to block the seam. The rest of the cowl has been blocked, but it's really important that you block that seam to get all of your stitches nice and smooth and flat. I have two stitches left on each needle, and I find it easier to do with two stitches left than with just one. So what I'm going to do, you can see I'm already losing stitches. Okay, I'm going to pick up that stitch where I have the stitch marker. So I'm going to put it on the needle just as it would be positioned as a stockinette stitch. So that right leg of the stitch goes in front and the left leg in back. And then I'm going to do that with this final stitch as well, which is a little bit trickier to position it just because you're doing it in reverse, and those were our differently oriented stitches. All right, so those stitches are back on the needle or needles, and I am going to knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. I'm going to knit off on this front needle. So right now I've got two stitches left on the front needle, two stitches left on the back. And remember, one of those stitches is my marked stitch with that removable marker. So I'm going to knit off, and then I'm also going to purl off because that stitch is finished. We had already done one leg of it, so that one is done. Now I'm going to purl off and then knit off because that stitch is now complete as well. Okay, I can take out these markers. Okay, I can kind of adjust my stitches by moving this around a little bit. I'm going to weave this yarn. I'm going to weave in a few stitches, just duplicate stitching it with some of the other main color stitches. And then all you have to do is stick the yarn tail into your cowl and trim it, and that tail will remain on the inside of your cowl. So that is it as far as kitchenering that stitch. Remember, you are going to have a seam because none of these other colorwork patterns have the white row in between, so it is going to look a little bit different. It is your seam, but once it's blocked, it will be nice and smooth. And thank you so much for joining me. You can find all of my patterns on Ravelry or paperdaisycreations.com. And as always, I wish you very happy knitting.